Dispatch knew we were inside Sector 9 before I keyed the mic. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the clearing, not the logs, not what Vasquez said at the end. The thing that sits in my chest when I'm driving home from a shift or standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m. staring at the fridge like it owes me something. It's that first radio call, the one where I reached for my handset to check in, and before I pressed the button, dispatch was already talking, already confirming our position, already using my call sign, already saying the words I hadn't spoken yet. I was a seasonal law enforcement ranger in a national park in the southern Cascades. I won't name the park. I signed something at the end of all this, and I don't know what it actually prevents me from saying, so I'm going to be careful about certain details. The ones that matter, the ones about what happened inside Sector 9. Those I'll give you straight. I'd been on staff for 5 months, long enough to know the district, the trails, the radio protocols, the people, long enough to trust the systems. That's an important word, and I didn't understand how important until later. Trust. You trust the radio because the radio is how you survive. You trust dispatch because dispatch is the voice that sends help when you're 3 hours from a trailhead with a broken ankle or a lost hiker bleeding from a fall. You trust the chain of command because it's the structure that keeps everything from being just you and the trees and whatever is out there in the dark. I trusted all of it. I want to be clear about that. I was not a paranoid person. I was not looking for something wrong. Vasquez and I drew Sector 9 on a Tuesday in late October. Evening patrol starting at 16:30, expected duration 6 to 8 hours. Vasquez had 6 years in the park. She was calm, professional, and slightly bored by anything that wasn't an actual emergency. I liked working with her because she didn't talk much and she didn't make things dramatic. If something was wrong, she said so. If nothing was wrong, she let the silence do its job. Sector 9 was the southwest drainage, remote, one access road, gated, mostly used by maintenance crews in summer. A network of backcountry trails that looped through old-growth timber and dropped into a creek drainage before climbing back up to a ridge. There was a seasonal ranger station about 4 miles in a small cabin, unmanned after September, stocked with basic supplies and a logbook. Standard backcountry setup. We drove in through the gate around 1640. Gravel road, canopy closing overhead within a quarter mile. I remember Vasquez adjusting the mirror and saying something about the light already being low. October in the Cascades. The sun drops behind the ridgeline early. By the time we parked at the trailhead and started gearing up, the shadows were long and the air had that cold mineral edge you get at elevation when the day is done. I checked my GPS unit, verified our coordinates, confirmed the patrol route on the map. Standard. I topped off my water, checked my flashlight batteries, made sure my radio was on the right channel. Vasquez did the same. No conversation needed. We'd done this enough times. We started down the main trail at 17:05. The plan was simple. Hike the loop, check trail conditions, clear any downed timber if it was manageable, verify the seasonal station was secure, and hike back out. A routine patrol in a remote sector. The kind of shift where the hardest part is staying warm. At 17:18, I reached for my radio to call in our first position check. Standard protocol, you check in when you enter the sector, then at regular intervals, and dispatch logs your position so someone knows where to start looking if you don't come back. I had the handset in my hand. My thumb was on the transmit button. I hadn't pressed it yet. The radio came alive. 27 dispatch. Copy your entry at the Sector 9 trailhead, 1705. You're showing 2 personnel on the east loop bearing south-southeast. GPS has you at... And she read our coordinates. Accurate to the meter. I stood there with my thumb still hovering over the button. I looked at Vasquez. She was a few steps ahead, adjusting a trekking pole. She'd heard it too. I keyed the mic. Dispatch 27, copy. That's correct. We're on the east loop about a mile in. I was just about to check in. Understood 27. Log shows you entered at 17:05. All personnel accounted for. Dispatch out. I clipped the radio back on my vest. Vasquez glanced over her shoulder. GPS probably auto-updated, she said. I nodded. That made sense. The units we carried had a satellite reporting function. They'd ping our position at intervals even if we didn't manually transmit. The signal wasn't always reliable under canopy, but it was possible. Dispatch could have seen us on the map and jumped the gun on the check-in. It made sense. I told myself that, and I kept walking. We were about 2 miles in, moving at a steady pace through a section of Douglas fir, when the radio crackled again. This time it was a different voice. Male. Calm and flat. The way people sound when they are reading from a screen. 2-7 dispatch. Be advised, Sector 9 is closed to all public access effective 1847. Closure order is in effect until 0600. All patrol personnel currently inside the sector should complete their assigned route. Do not exit early. Confirm receipt. I stopped. Vasquez stopped. I looked at my watch. It was 17:53. The closure would take effect in less than an hour. I keyed the mic. Dispatch 2-7, copy the closure. Can you clarify? Are we supposed to complete the full loop? That's a 6-hour route. You want us inside a closed sector until past midnight? Affirmative 2-7. Complete the assigned route. Waypoints as briefed. The closure is for public access only. Ranger personnel are authorized to remain inside. All personnel accounted for. There it was again. All personnel accounted for. I hadn't given a head count. I hadn't confirmed who was with me. Vasquez came back to where I was standing. Wildlife closure, she said. Probably a sow with cubs near the trailhead. They closed the sector so nobody stumbles into her. We're already past the denning zone, so they want us to finish out and come back through after she moves. That made sense too. Seasonal closures happened. Bears were active in October, fattening before hibernation. A sow with cubs near a trailhead was exactly the kind of thing that triggered a closure order. Vasquez had seen it before. I hadn't. Not from inside the sector. But the logic was sound. Okay, I said. We kept moving. The trail dropped into the creek drainage around 1830. The light was gone by then, full dark, under the canopy, flashlights on, the creek running cold somewhere below us to the left. The temperature had fallen maybe 10 degrees. I could see my breath. At 1842, the radio came on again. Same male voice. 2-7 dispatch. Be advised. The footbridge at Junction 4 Alpha has a partial washout on the south approach. Approximately 18 inches of decking compromised on the downstream side. Bridge is passable, but use caution. Confirm when you've crossed. I looked at the map. Junction 4 Alpha was the creek crossing, about a quarter mile ahead. We hadn't reached it yet. Dispatch, 2-7, copy the advisory. We're not at 4 Alpha yet. How recent is that report? Current as of this evening, 2-7. Confirm when you've crossed. Dispatch out. Vasquez didn't say anything. We walked. At 1856, we reached Junction 4 Alpha. I put my flashlight on the footbridge. The south approach had a partial washout. Approximately 18 inches of decking was missing on the downstream side. The raw wood underneath was wet and pale. The break recent, maybe a day old, maybe less. Vasquez crossed first, stepping wide around the gap. I followed. On the other side, she stopped and looked back at the bridge, then at me. Day crew probably reported it, she said. The day crew hasn't been in Sector 9 since Thursday, I said. I saw the schedule. Vasquez paused. I could see her working through it, the same calculation I was doing. The bridge damage was fresh. No crew had been in the sector for 5 days. Dispatch described it accurately down to the measurement before we arrived. She looked at the bridge for another moment. Then she turned and started walking again. Dispatch gets reports from a lot of sources, she said without turning around. Maintenance, volunteer trail crews, flyovers. Could have been any of them. I checked my GPS unit while she walked ahead. The screen showed our position accurate, but the satellite status indicator was showing 1 bar. Marginal signal. I scrolled to the transmission log. The last successful position report the unit had sent to the network was 43 minutes ago, back near the trailhead before we dropped into the drainage and lost solid satellite coverage. Dispatch had read out our exact coordinates at 1718. But according to the unit's own log, it hadn't successfully transmitted since 1715. A 3-minute window. Close enough, maybe. But the footbridge. Dispatch described the footbridge damage specific, measured, accurate for a location we hadn't reached, in a sector no crew had visited in 5 days, using information that didn't come from our GPS because our GPS wasn't reliably transmitting. I stood there, in the dark, holding the unit, the creek running below. Vasquez's flashlight getting smaller up the trail. I almost keyed the mic. Almost asked dispatch how they knew about the bridge. The question was right there, fully formed, pressing against the back of my teeth. I didn't ask. Looking back, I think that was the moment that mattered. Not because the answer would have changed anything, but because I already knew, somewhere underneath the rationalizing, that the answer wouldn't make sense. And I wasn't ready for that yet. I put the GPS away and followed Vasquez into the dark. The trail climbed out of the creek drainage and into a section of older forest I hadn't patrolled before. Sector 9's loop was long enough that most evening patrols only covered 2/3 of it before turning back. The eastern leg, where we were now, was the part that usually got skipped. Too far in, too little to see, too much time spent on flat trail with no features worth checking. I'd looked at this section on the topo map before we left. It was supposed to be a gradual climb through second-growth timber, following a bench above the creek for about a mile before cutting north toward the seasonal station. Simple terrain, nothing unusual on paper, but the forest didn't feel right. I noticed the silence first, not quiet silence. The creek sound faded behind us faster than it should have, given the drainage. No insects, no rustling, no small mammals in the undergrowth. October in the Cascades, the woods slow down at night, but they don't go mute. There's always something, a mouse, a bat, wind moving through a dead snag. Something, there was nothing. Vasquez was 20 yards ahead, moving at the same steady pace. I watched her flashlight beam sweep the trail in a practiced rhythm, left, center, right, center. She wasn't reacting to the silence. Either she hadn't noticed or she decided not to mention it. I took a breath and caught it. The smell. Not the normal forest smell of damp wood and decomposition. Something underneath it. Mineral. Clean in a way that felt wrong, like the air over a lake in winter. Cold and stripped of anything organic. I'd smelled it before in caves, near certain rock formations, never on a trail, in the middle of a Douglas fir stand. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say about a smell. I kept walking. At 19:23, my radio crackled. The male voice again. 2-7 dispatch. Route update. Divert from the standard loop to Waypoint 14, bearing 240 from your current position, approximately 1.3 miles. Confirm receipt. I pulled out the map and unfolded it against my thigh, holding the flashlight in my teeth. The patrol route was marked in blue highlighter, the standard loop. Waypoint 14 was marked with a small circle and the number 14 in pencil. No label, no elevation tag, no feature description, no associated trail name, just a point on the map, sitting in a blank area between two contour lines off the main loop by almost a mile to the southwest. I hadn't noticed it during the briefing. I would have, if it had been part of the assigned route. It wasn't. The patrol brief listed waypoints 1 through 12. 14 wasn't in the sequence. Neither was 13. I keyed the mic. Dispatch 2-7, I'm looking at the sector map and waypoint 14 isn't on our assigned route. There's no trail feature listed and no description in the patrol brief. Can you clarify the purpose of the diversion? The pause lasted about 4 seconds. Then the voice came back. Same flat tone. Waypoint 14 is a standard observation point. All Sector 9 patrol personnel are directed to include Waypoint 14 when operating after hours. Proceed as directed. All personnel accounted for. I stood there with the mic in my hand. All personnel accounted for. Third time. I hadn't confirmed headcount. I hadn't confirmed our status. Dispatch was telling me everyone was accounted for as though I'd asked, as though the question had been transmitted and I'd simply forgotten I'd asked it. Dispatch 2-7, I'd like to speak with the duty supervisor regarding the route change. We were briefed on waypoints 1 through 12. I'm not comfortable diverting to an unscheduled point without 2-7 dispatch. The diversion is standard for after-hours operations in Sector 9. Proceed to Waypoint 14. Your supervisor has been notified. Dispatch out. The channel went quiet, not silent quiet. The slight hiss of an open frequency as though someone on the other end had stopped transmitting but hadn't fully released. Vasquez appeared at my shoulder. She'd walked back while I was talking. "What's the issue?" she asked. "They want us to divert to Waypoint 14. I showed her the map. "It's off route. It's not in the brief. There's no feature listed, no trail name, nothing. And they're calling it a standard observation point, but I've never heard of it." Vasquez looked at the map. She found the mark. She studied it for a moment, then folded the map and handed it back. "We do the route," she said. "If dispatch says divert, we divert. That's how it works. You've never been to Waypoint 14? "I've never drawn Sector 9 after dark." She paused. "The after-hours patrols have different waypoints sometimes. Might be a wildlife monitoring station, camera post, something seasonal." "Then why isn't it in the brief?" Vasquez looked at me the way she looked at new seasonals who asked too many questions about things that didn't matter. Patient, but finished with the conversation. "Give me the radio," she said. I handed it. She keyed the mic. "Dispatch 27 Bravo. Copy the diversion to Waypoint 14. En route, 27 Bravo out." She clipped the radio to her vest and started walking on the new bearing without waiting for me. Southwest, off trail, into the section of forest that the map showed as featureless. I followed, not because I agreed, because the alternative was standing alone on a dark trail in a closed sector, holding a map with a pencil mark I couldn't explain, listening to a radio that knew things it shouldn't know. We walked off trail for about 20 minutes. The forest changed. It happened gradually enough that I almost missed it. The second growth fir thinned out and was replaced by older trees, much older. The trunks were wider, the canopy higher, the understory more open. The ground cover shifted from fern and salal to bare duff, dark and compact, like a floor that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. I checked the topo map twice. The contour lines showed a gentle southwest slope. What we were walking through was flat, dead flat for hundreds of yards in every direction. The drainage pattern on the map showed a seasonal creek crossing our path. There was no creek bed, no indication that water had ever moved through this ground. The map was wrong, or the terrain was. Vasquez didn't slow down. Her flashlight beam held steady on the same rhythm. She was navigating by compass, and her bearing hadn't wavered. At 2031, I put my flashlight on a tree to my left and stopped. There was a surveyor's blaze cut into the bark at chest height, fresh. The sapwood was still pale and damp. Over the blaze, someone had sprayed a rectangle of orange paint, standard forestry marking. Inside the rectangle, stenciled in black, was a date, 3 weeks from today. I stood there and read it twice. The format was standard, the same format used on timber sale boundaries, trail reroutes, survey markers, month, day, year, stenciled clean and professional. And the date was 22 days in the future. I pulled out my phone and took a photograph. The flash lit up the tree and the surrounding trunks, and for a moment I could see the geometry of the forest around me, the unnatural spacing, the uniformity of the canopy, the bare ground, stretching in every direction like a floor. Then the flash died, and the dark came back. "Vasquez?" She stopped, came back. I showed her the blaze. She looked at it, looked at the date, looked at me. "Survey crew probably got the year wrong," she said. "It's the right year. The date is November 19th. Then they marked it early. Happens on big projects. They flag the start date for the crew so everyone knows when work begins. In the middle of a national park, in an area with no road access and no active timber program." Vasquez looked at the blaze one more time. Her expression didn't change. She turned and started walking again. I took one more photograph. The orange paint was so fresh I could smell it. That sharp chemical brightness cutting through the dead mineral air like a wrong note in an empty room. I put my phone away and followed her. At 21:47, the radio activated again. No call sign, no preamble, just the voice. 27 dispatch. Be advised, Status change expected at Sector 9 at 22:14. All personnel should maintain current bearing and pace. Confirm receipt. I checked my watch. 2147. Dispatch was telling me that something was going to change in 27 minutes. Not something that had happened, something that would happen at a specific time in the future. I keyed the mic. My voice was steady, but I had to think about keeping it that way. Dispatch 27, copy. Can you clarify the nature of the status change? Sector 9 status will update at 22:14. Continue to Waypoint 14. All personnel accounted for. The channel hissed and went quiet. I stood in the dark in a forest that didn't match my map, next to a tree marked with a date that hadn't happened yet, holding a radio that was telling me the future. Vasquez was already 30 yards ahead, a flashlight moving through the geometric trees with the steady, unquestioning pace of someone following instructions she'd already decided to trust. 27 minutes. Dispatch had given me a countdown to something it hadn't named. And for the first time since the footbridge, I didn't try to explain it. I didn't reach for a rational version. I just stood there and felt the ground under my boots. That hard, cold, undisturbed ground, and understood that we were walking towards something that had been expecting us. I caught up with Vasquez. We didn't speak. The trees stood around us in their even rows, and the dark was patient. And somewhere ahead in the featureless terrain, Waypoint 14 was waiting at the end of a bearing that Dispatch had chosen for us. And the clock was running. We walked for another 30 minutes without speaking. The forest held its strange geometry, those evenly spaced trunks, the bare ground, the silence that wasn't just absence of sound but felt like sound being held back. I kept my flashlight on the trail Vasquez was cutting through the duff, watching her boots leave prints in the dark soil. She moved like someone following a path she could feel, even though there was nothing marked on the ground. At 22:03, my flashlight caught a shape ahead, angular, man-made, sitting in a small clearing between the trees. The seasonal ranger station. I'd been expecting it further north, based on the map, but the map had been wrong about the drainage, wrong about the creek, wrong about the terrain. Finding the station off position, barely registered anymore. It was a standard backcountry cabin, maybe 12 by 14 feet, log frame, metal roof, small covered porch. A padlock on the door, but the shackle was open, hanging from the hasp like someone had unlocked it and not bothered to remove it. The windows were dark. A small solar panel on the roof fed a battery box mounted to the south wall. "Let's stop here," I said. "Take 10, check the maps." Vasquez looked at the cabin, then at her compass, then back at me. I could tell she wanted to keep moving, but she nodded and stepped onto the porch. I pushed the door open. The smell inside was stale air and mouse droppings, and the faint chemical note of old fire retardant. Standard. I swept the room with my flashlight. One table, 2 chairs, a wall-mounted first aid kit, a shelf with emergency supplies, water purification tablets, a wool blanket, a box of Strike Anywhere matches, a CB radio mounted on the wall, unpowered, a laminated evacuation map thumbtacked above the table, and a logbook, green hardcover, NPS emblem on the front, sitting open on the table. I sat down and pulled it toward me. My plan was simple. Sign us in, note the date and time, record our waypoints, and move on. Standard practice. Every ranger who passes through a backcountry station signs the log. It's how you build a record of use, report trail conditions, flag maintenance needs. I opened to the most recent entry and started reading. Then I turned back a page. Then another. Vasquez was on the porch, refilling her water bottle from the station's gravity filter. I could hear her working the pump. I turned another page. "Vasquez," I said, "come look at this." She came inside and stood behind me. I angled the flashlight so she could read over my shoulder. The logbook went back 7 years. Not 7 years of scattered entries, hikers passing through, maintenance crews checking the roof, seasonal rangers on random patrols. 7 years of the same patrol, every October, within a 5-day window of the same date. Always 2 personnel, always an evening entry, always after dark. Every entry noted the closure order. Everyone gave the same time, 1847. Every entry referenced Waypoint 14. The handwriting changed each year. Different names, different badge numbers. Some entries were brief, just the date, the waypoint list, the sign-off. Others were longer. Those were the ones that made the hair on my arms stand up. I'll give you a few of them, not all of them. The ones I remember. 3 years ago, 2 names I didn't recognize. The entry was neat, professional, standard format. In the margin, in smaller handwriting, someone had added, "Dispatch confirmed our position at the trailhead before we transmitted. GPS unit was not sending. Reported to district supervisor." No response. 5 years ago, different names. The entry was shorter, but there was a note at the bottom. Waypoint 14 is not on the current sector map. Requested clarification from dispatch. Was told it is a standard observation point. No further explanation. Point does not appear in any training material or SOP I have access to. 6 years ago, 2 more names. A longer margin note, written in a hand that pressed hard enough to dent the next page. This is the 3rd time I have requested information about the Sector 9 after-hours protocol. I have been told it is standard. It is not standard. There is no documentation. There is no SOP. The waypoint is not in the database. I am noting this for the record. And 4 years ago, one name, a ranger I'd heard of, vaguely. She transferred to a different park mid-season. People said she'd requested the move for personal reasons. Her entry was the most detailed. Neat handwriting, careful spacing. At the bottom she'd written, "Asked dispatch directly how they knew our position before we called in." Channel went silent for approximately 10 seconds. Then dispatch repeated the standard phrase. No explanation. I was reassigned to front country operations the following week and did not return to Sector 9. I sat back in the chair. The wood creaked under me. 7 years. At least 7 teams of 2 had walked this exact route in October. Same closure time. Same diversion to Waypoint 14. Same radio anomalies. And every team that noticed every ranger who pushed back, asked the wrong question, or tried to document the discrepancy either went quiet or got moved. I looked up at Vasquez. She had read everything I'd read. Her face was still, not blank still, the way a person looks when they are choosing very carefully what to say next. She reached past me and closed the logbook. "That doesn't change the assignment," she said. "Vasquez, 7 years. Same date, same route, same..." I read it. "Then you see the pattern." I see a logbook in a backcountry station that nobody audits. People write all kinds of things in the complaints, theories, personal notes. That doesn't make them operational. The closure time, 1847, every year. Coincidence or policy? Either way, it doesn't change what dispatch told us to do. She said it calmly, reasonably, and I almost believed she believed it. But there was something in the way she closed the book, not casually, but completely, pressing the cover down flat as though she were sealing it. She didn't want to look at it again. I checked my watch. 22:11. 3 minutes. I opened my mouth to say something. I don't remember what. Vasquez held up her hand. "Listen," she said. I listened. Nothing had changed. The silence outside was the same oppressive absence it had been for the last hour. No wind, no insects, no creak. The cabin walls ticked faintly as the temperature dropped. My flashlight hummed on its lowest setting. Then, at 22:14, something shifted. I don't know how to describe it except to say that the quality of the dark changed. Not the depth, not the density, the quality. It was like the difference between an empty room and a room where someone is standing behind you with their eyes open. The darkness outside the cabin windows was the same darkness that had been there all night. But now it was paying attention. I felt it in my chest first. A pressure. Not physical, more like the awareness you get when someone is staring at the back of your head in a crowded room. The certainty that you are being observed, not by eyes, but by something that has turned its full attention toward you and is waiting to see what you do. Vasquez felt it too. I could tell because she stopped moving. She was standing by the door with her hand on the frame, and she froze. Not in fear, but in recognition. Like a sound she'd been expecting had finally arrived. The radio activated. No static, no let-in, just the voice. 2-7 dispatch. Status change confirmed at 22:14. All personnel accounted for. Sector 9 is active. Continue to Waypoint 14. Standard protocol. The words sat in the room like something placed on the table. Sector 9 is active. I had been through every training module the park offered. Seasonal orientation, backcountry protocols, emergency response, wildlife management, hazmat. I had read every SOP in the district. I had attended it for 5 months. I had never heard the phrase Sector 9. It wasn't in the vocabulary of the park as I knew it. I keyed the mic. Dispatch 2-7. Can you define active? What is the nature of the status change? 4 seconds of silence. Then, Sector 9 is active. Proceed to observation point. Standard protocol. Dispatch out. The channel closed. This time there was no residual hiss, just dead air, as if the frequency itself had been switched off from the other end. I looked at Vasquez. She was already putting on her pack, not quickly, not with panic, with the smooth automatic efficiency of someone who has received clear instructions and is carrying them out. She tightened her shoulder straps, clipped her sternum buckle, adjusted her flashlight, and checked her compass bearing. Each movement was practiced and calm. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't even tense. She was compliant, and the compliance was total. Vasquez, wait. Waypoint 14, she said, 1.3 miles. We should be there by 2300 if we maintain pace. Just hold on. Think about what we just read. 7 years of rangers walking the same route. Same date, same time, and nobody can explain why. She looked at me, and what I saw in her expression wasn't disagreement or dismissal. It was patience. The kind of patience you show someone who is making a situation harder than it needs to be. The job is the job, she said. We were assigned the patrol. Dispatch gave us the route. We walked the route. That's what I've done for 6 years, and it's what you're going to do tonight. She stepped off the porch and started walking, southwest, toward Waypoint 14. Her flashlight cut a clean line through the dark. I stood in the doorway of the station and watched her go. The logbook was behind me on the table. Ahead of me was the dark, and Vasquez, and the thing that dispatch had called active at 22:14 with the calm confidence of someone reading a tide chart. I looked down at the logbook one more time. I'd been reading the older entries. I hadn't checked the most recent one. I went back to the table, opened the book to the last written page. Last year's entry, October. 2 names I didn't recognize. The handwriting was hurried, less careful than the others. The waypoints were listed. The closure time was noted, 1847. The diversion to Waypoint 14 was recorded, and then, at the bottom, the entry continued onto the last line of the page. It stopped mid-sentence, reached Waypoint 14 at 2. The pen had trailed off, not lifted, cleanly dragged. A faint line of ink extended from the unfinished word to the edge of the page, as though the hand holding the pen had been moved while it was still writing. I closed the book. I put it back on the table. I walked out of the station and followed Vasquez into the trees. I did not want to go. I want to be clear about that. Every rational part of me was saying, turn around, walk back to the truck, drive out, call someone in the morning. But Vasquez was out there, alone, moving toward a point that 7 years of rangers had been directed to, and the last team to reach it hadn't finished their sentence. I couldn't leave her, so I walked. The distance between us grew. Vasquez moved through the trees like she was on a marked trail, her flashlight steady, her pace never changing. I was faster than her on most hikes, longer stride, better conditioning on elevation. But I couldn't close the gap. Every time I sped up, she seemed to already be further ahead, her light smaller between the trunks. I called out twice. The first time she answered without turning around. Copy. Continuing to Waypoint. Not my name, not a normal response. A radio acknowledgement spoken out loud in the tone she used for dispatch. The second time she didn't answer at all. I kept walking. The forest was the same geometric spacing, bare ground, older trees than anything mapped in this sector. My flashlight beam moved across the trunks in a steady sweep, and in the uniformity of the spacing, I started to feel something I hadn't expected. Not fear, Familiarity, the kind of recognition you get when you've been in a place before, even when you know you haven't. The angle of the trees, the pattern of the canopy gaps, the way the ground felt underfoot, hard and cold and deliberately flat. My body was responding to the landscape as though it had already learned it. I was wrong about that feeling. I think. I'm still not sure. At 22:37, my flashlight caught something on the ground that made me stop. Boot prints. Not Vasquez's. She was ahead and to my right on a slightly different line. These were to my left, running parallel to my path, heading in the same direction. I knelt down and put the light on them. There were dozens. All the same tread pattern, all the same depth, all the same size. They ran in a line through the bare soil, spaced at a natural walking stride, heading southwest toward Waypoint 14. I looked at the sole of my own boot. Standard issue Danner. I placed my foot next to the nearest print. It matched. Exactly, not approximately exactly, same tread, same wear pattern, same slight scuff on the outer heel where my gait rolls. My boot, my walk, my weight distribution, printed into ground I hadn't walked on. I stood up and swept the flashlight wider. More prints. Not just one line, multiple lines, radiating outward at different angles, all converging on a point ahead. All the same boot, all my size, as though someone wearing my exact footwear had approached the same destination from a dozen different bearings, and I was seeing all the paths at once. I thought about the logbook. 7 years. Different names, different handwriting, but the route was always the same. The waypoint was always the same. And if whoever, whatever, documented those patrols also documented the physical presence of every ranger who walked this ground, then the boot prints might not be mine at all. They might belong to the last person who wore size 11 Danners and followed a compass, bearing toward a point that dispatch insisted was standard. That explanation should have been comforting. It wasn't, because the wear pattern on the outer heel was mine. I'd had these boots resoled once, 6 months ago. The scuff was from a habit I'd been trying to correct since my first season. No one else walked in these boots. I kept moving. 3 minutes later, the trees ended. Not gradually, they stopped. A clean edge, as though the forest had been measured and cut. Beyond the last row of trunks was open ground. Bare soil. A circle. Vasquez was standing at the edge. Her flashlight was off. She was perfectly still, facing the center of the clearing, her pack straps tight, her arms at her sides. She looked like someone standing at attention. I came up beside her and looked. The clearing was roughly 60 feet across, a perfect circle of bare earth. No grass, no seedlings, no deadfall, no stones. The soil was dark and smooth, packed hard like a floor that had been swept. There were no structures, no markers, no equipment, no sign that any human being had ever built, placed, or installed anything here. It was empty, and it was the most occupied space I had ever stood in. I don't have a better way to say it. The clearing was full, not of anything I could see or hear or name, full of something that was using the space the way a lens uses light, focusing it, directing it, holding it in place. I could feel it against my skin, against the inside of my chest, behind my eyes. The attention, not my attention on the clearing. The clearing's attention on me. I was being looked at, measured, noted, by the ground, by the air, by the geometry of the circle itself. The act of standing there and seeing it was not incidental. It was the point. My observation was the function. The radio came on, clear, immediate, no static. 2-7 dispatch. Observation confirmed at waypoint 14. Hold position. Duration 43 minutes. Acknowledge. 43 minutes, not 40, not 45, 43. A number chosen with the specificity of a measurement, not a policy. I did not acknowledge. I turned around. My legs worked. My body obeyed. I took 2 steps back toward the tree line. Vasquez's hand closed on my forearm. Not hard, not aggressive, firm. The way you'd stop a coworker from walking into a room they didn't have clearance for. Professional, certain. We hold position, she said. That's the protocol. What protocol? Show me the SOP, Vasquez. Show me the manual. Show me anything with a signature and a date that says we stand in a circle in the woods at midnight and wait for 43 minutes. She looked at me. Her eyes were calm, present. She was not in a trance. She was not confused. She was entirely herself, and that made it worse. You felt it, she said. When we got here, you felt what this is? This is the job, it's the real one. Not the trail checks and the campground patrols and the bear closures. This is why they keep people on staff in October. This is why the sector closes. This is why dispatch tracks us. Dispatch isn't tracking us. Our GPS hasn't been transmitting. I know, she said. And she said it the way you say I know when someone tells you something you figured out a long time ago and decided not to fight. She let go of my arm and turned back to the clearing. She stood at the edge and resumed her position, still, patient, facing center. I keyed the mic. My hand was not steady. Dispatch 27. Requesting immediate extraction from Sector 9. Emergency traffic. We are at Waypoint 14, and I am requesting a vehicle at the trailhead. Respond. 3 seconds of silence, then the voice. The same flat, measured voice that had been with us all night. All personnel accounted for. Observation in progress. 37 minutes remaining. Maintain position. 27. Dispatch, I am making an emergency request. I need a supervisor on this channel. Now. 37 minutes remaining. Dispatch out. The channel died. I stood at the edge of the clearing with my radio in my hand and understood with a clarity that felt physical that no one was coming. Dispatch was not going to send help. Dispatch was not confused or understaffed or dealing with a communication error. Dispatch knew exactly where we were, exactly what was happening, and was managing the situation with the calm institutional patience of an organization that had done this 7 times before, at least 7 times. I clipped the radio back on my vest. I stood next to Vasquez. I looked at the clearing and the clearing looked back. The minutes passed. I know that sounds simple. It wasn't. Each minute had a texture. The attention I'd felt when I arrived didn't hold steady. It moved. It shifted around the circle, focusing on different sections of the perimeter, then returning to me. I could feel it the way you feel sunlight moving across your face when clouds pass. A warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. A pressure that had nothing to do with weight. At some point, maybe 10 minutes in, I looked down at the soil near my feet. The boot prints were here too. The same prints. My tread, my wear pattern, my stride. But these were positioned at intervals around the perimeter of the circle. A complete circuit. 40, maybe 50 prints, evenly spaced, as though someone had walked the entire circumference at a measured pace and returned to the starting point. I had not moved from where I was standing. The circuit was already complete. My boots had already walked it. The clearing had documented a path I hadn't taken in prints that matched my feet exactly, and the record was in the ground before I arrived. I was looking at evidence of my own future compliance, already pressed into the earth. I was staring at the prints when I heard Vasquez's voice. She was speaking, not to me, not into a radio. She was standing 6 feet to my right, facing the clearing, and she was murmuring in a low, steady tone, the cadence of someone reading a report. Waypoint confirmed. 2 personnel on station. Observation initiated at 22:49. Duration holding, bearing 240 nominal. Atmospheric signature consistent. Grid references, status updates, coordinates. Delivered in the flat, professional tone of a field report. She wasn't pausing for breath the way you do in conversation. She was transmitting, continuously, without equipment. I looked at my radio. The handset was clipped to my vest, the channel open but untouched. A response came through the speaker. Copy 27 Bravo. Status received. Duration on track. 21 minutes remaining, all personnel accounted for. Dispatch was acknowledging her, acknowledging transmissions that hadn't come through any radio. Vasquez was speaking aloud in the forest, at the edge of a clearing, and dispatch was hearing her, or something was hearing her, and passing it along. Vasquez? I said, Vasquez, stop. She didn't stop. She didn't acknowledge me. She continued in the same measured cadence. her eyes open, her posture unchanged. She was conscious. She was present. But she was performing a function that had nothing to do with me, and my voice was not part of the protocol. I stood there for 21 more minutes. I will not describe all of it. Some of it I don't fully remember, not because I lost consciousness, but because the attention of the clearing seemed to move through me at certain moments. And during those moments, my sense of time became unreliable. I would check my watch and find that 3 minutes had passed, or 8, without any clear memory of the interval. I was present the entire time. I was standing, breathing, aware. But something was using the part of my mind that tracks duration and giving it back slightly worn. At 23:32, the radio activated one final time. 2-7 dispatch. Observation complete. Duration 43 minutes. All personnel accounted for. Return to vehicle via inbound route. Sector 9 will reopen at 0600. Good work tonight. Good work tonight. As though we'd completed a trail count or filed a campsite report. The pressure lifted. Not gradually, it released. Like a hand opening. The air in the clearing thinned. The attention withdrew, and the circle of bare ground was suddenly just dirt. Empty. Neutral. A clearing in the woods that meant nothing. Vasquez blinked. She looked at me. Her expression was normal. Tired, a little cold, but normal. That wasn't so bad, she said. Conversational, as though we'd waited out a rain delay. She turned on her flashlight and started walking back northeast, toward the tree line, toward the trail, toward the truck. Her pace was easy. She adjusted her pack straps and rolled her neck like someone finishing a long shift. I didn't follow immediately. I stood at the edge of the clearing and pointed my flashlight at the ground one more time. The boot prints were still there, the full circuit. My tread, my stride, my wear pattern, walked into the soil of a path I had never taken. And at the far edge of the circle, where the last print ended and the tree line began, something else. New growth, tiny blades of grass, pale green, pushing up through the bare soil. Not old growth minutes old. The clearing was healing, closing over, covering the evidence of what had happened here with a layer of living ground that, by morning, would look like every other patch of forest floor in the sector. By morning there would be nothing to find. I turned off my flashlight and followed Vasquez into the trees. The walk back took 2 hours. The forest let us go. That's how it felt, not that we were leaving, but that we were being released. The geometric spacing of the trees loosened within the first quarter mile. The undergrowth returned, ferns, salal, the tangled low cover of a normal Cascade forest floor. The ground softened underfoot, uneven again. The deadfall and root structures of a drainage that hadn't been swept clean. The sounds came back too. An owl somewhere northwest. The creek audible again in the drainage below. Small things in the brush mice. Maybe a vole. The forest was breathing. It had not been breathing for hours, and now it was. And the contrast made the normalcy feel fragile, like a room that's been cleaned after something happened in it. Vasquez walked beside me now, not ahead. Her pace was easy, conversational. At one point, she asked if I'd been to a diner in town that had started doing breakfast burritos on weekdays. She said the green chili was decent, but the tortillas were the packaged kind. I let her talk. I didn't trust myself to respond normally, and I didn't want to test it. We reached the truck at 04:47. The sky was lightening in the east, a thin gray band above the ridge. The access road gate was open. I was certain I'd seen it closed when we drove in, but I didn't say anything. I started the engine and drove. The gravel road unwound through the canopy and led us out onto the paved county road. A mile from the park boundary, a day shift ranger was parked at the intersection in a green truck. He waved us through and leaned out his window as we passed. "Long night?" He said it the way you say it when you already know the answer. Not a question, an acknowledgement. I drove to the district office. The parking lot was mostly empty. 05:30, too early for the admin staff, too late for the night patrol handoff. One vehicle I didn't recognize sat near the side entrance. A silver sedan, government plates, no markings. Vasquez unclipped her pack in the passenger seat and stretched her shoulders. I'm going to clock out and go home, she said. I'll file the patrol summary from my laptop later today. You're not going to the debrief? She looked at me with genuine confusion. What debrief? For Sector 9. The observation, the closure. That's just the patrol report, standard form. I'll file it online. She opened her door, then stopped, looked at me for a moment. Something moved behind her expression, not concern, not guilt. Recognition. She was seeing something in my face that she understood but had decided not to share. Get some sleep, she said, and she walked to her car and drove away. I sat in the truck for 3 minutes and then I went inside. The district office hallway was empty. Fluorescent lights, linoleum, bulletin boards with fire danger ratings and union notices. I walked past the patrol room and the equipment cage toward the small conference room at the end of the hall where post-incident briefings were held. The door was open. Henderson was inside. I'd met Henderson once, during orientation. District Operations Supervisor. Career NPS, maybe 25 years. He had the look of someone who had stopped being surprised by his own agency a long time ago. Calm, administrative. He was sitting at the table with a single sheet of paper in front of him and a pen beside it. Have a seat, he said. I sat. He slid the paper across the table. It wasn't an incident report. It wasn't a patrol summary. The header read, Sector 9 Completion Acknowledgement. I'd never seen this form before. It wasn't in the district binder. It wasn't in the online forms portal. It had the NPS Arrowhead logo and a form number I didn't recognize. I read it. Date. Correct. Personnel. My name and Vasquez's with badge numbers. Entry time. 17:05. Closure order received. 18:47. Waypoints visited. A sequential list, including Waypoint 14. Observation initiated. 22:49. Observation duration 43 minutes. Observation completed. 23:32. Sector status upon departure. Inactive. Every field was filled in. Every detail was accurate. At the bottom, a single line. Was the observation completed without interruption? A checkbox for yes. A checkbox for no. Both blank. Below that, a signature line. Also blank. How do you have this already? I asked. Henderson folded his hands on the table. Dispatch files the operational summary in real time. Timestamps, waypoints, duration, it's all logged as the patrol progresses. This form is generated from that data. Your signature just closes the loop. In real time. From what source? Our GPS wasn't transmitting for most of the night? Henderson looked at me the way Vasquez had looked at the logbook. Steady, patient, choosing. The system has multiple inputs, he said. I'm not the technical lead on that. I process the paperwork. I looked at the form again. Below the signature line, in smaller type, there was an additional field I'd missed. Next scheduled observation, November 19th. The date on the surveyor's blaze. 3 weeks from now, and beside it 2 names. Rangers I had never met. Assigned personnel, Kowalski, M. Dunn, R. The next team was already assigned. The next closure was already scheduled. The next form was probably already generated, sitting in a folder somewhere. Every field blank except the ones that could be filled in advance. Entry time 17:05. Closure order 1847. Waypoint 14. 43 minutes. All personnel accounted for. I checked the yes box. I signed my name. I didn't sign because I agreed. I signed because I was sitting in a government office in a building I reported to every day, across from a supervisor who had processed this form before, many times before, and the alternative was refusing to sign a document that described events that had actually happened accurately in a format I couldn't contest. The Rangers in the logbook who'd asked too many questions had been reassigned. The ones who'd signed had simply moved on with their lives. I understood the math. Henderson took the form, placed it in a manila folder, and stood up. Any questions? He asked. The way you ask it when you hope the answer is no. I had one. What are we observing? Henderson paused. He was halfway to the door. He turned back and looked at me, not at my face, but at my eyes, as though checking for something specific. You felt it, he said, right? In the clearing. I nodded. Then you already know more than I'm able to put on a form. He left. The folder went with him. I heard his footsteps in the hallway, then a door closing, then nothing. I drove home, showered, made coffee, Sat at my kitchen table and watched the light come up through the window over the sink. Cars passed on the street. A neighbor walked a dog. The garbage truck came and went. The world was operating normally, and I was inside it, and I was fine. I was not injured. I was not sick. I was not being followed or watched or threatened. But I still had my GPS unit. I hadn't turned it in at the district office. Technically, it was government property, but seasonals often kept their units between shifts for route planning. Nobody would notice for days. That evening, I plugged it into my laptop and opened the track log. The route was there. Access road, main trail, creek drainage, Junction 4 Alpha, the long off-trail segment southwest through the geometric forest, and then Waypoint 14. The track didn't stop at the clearing. It continued, a clean, precise loop around the perimeter of the circle. Evenly spaced data points, consistent pace, consistent bearing change, a complete circuit, 360 degrees, performed over 43 minutes. My GPS unit had recorded me walking the full circumference of the observation point in a measured geometric pattern. I had not walked that circuit. I had stood at the edge of the clearing for 43 minutes and not moved. I was certain of that. I remembered my feet on the ground. I remembered the cold. I remembered Vasquez's voice beside me and the boot prints that were already there when I arrived. But the unit's track log said otherwise. And the track log matched the boot prints. And the boot prints matched my boots. And my boots were on my feet, sitting under my kitchen table, dirt from the clearing still packed into the treads. Something had walked the circuit wearing my feet, or I had walked it and couldn't remember. Or the distinction between those two things didn't matter to whatever. It documented the result. I closed the laptop. I sat for a while. Then I opened the park's internal staff portal and navigated to the duty roster for November. My name was not on the Sector 9 rotation. I wasn't scheduled for evening patrols at all. My shifts were daytime, front country, campground loops, and parking lot checks. Routine work, safe work, the kind of assignments they give you when they've gotten what they needed. 2 names were on the Sector 9 line, Kowalski and Dunn, the same names from the bottom of the form. I didn't recognize either one. I checked the district staff directory. Both were seasonals, hired the same month I was. Both were assigned to the Southwest District. Neither had drawn Sector 9 before. I picked up my phone. I had the district number on speed dial. I could call the office, ask to be connected to Kowalski or Dunn, tell them about the logbook, the radio, the footbridge, the clearing, tell them about the boot prints, tell them about the 43 minutes. I held the phone for a long time. I put it down. Not because I was afraid. I want to be honest about that. I was not afraid of retaliation or reassignment or being called unstable. I put the phone down because I knew with the same quiet, institutional certainty that Vasquez had shown at the edge of the clearing that the warning would change nothing. The route was already mapped. The closure order was already written. Dispatch already knew they would be inside. And whatever I said on the phone, Kowalski and Dunn would drive through the gate at 1640, hike the main trail, cross the footbridge at Junction 4 Alpha, and follow a compass bearing southwest through a forest that didn't match their maps because dispatch would tell them to, and they would trust the radio because the radio is how you survive. The system doesn't need me to understand it. It doesn't need me to agree with it. It doesn't need me to warn anyone or keep silent or process what happened in the clearing or make peace with the 43 minutes I can't account for. It needed me to complete my shift, and I did. My name is in the logbook at the seasonal station. My signature is on the completion form in Henderson's filing cabinet. My boot prints are in the ground at Waypoint 14 under new grass that grew in overnight to cover them. And my GPS track log shows a circuit I didn't choose to walk, performed with a precision I'm not capable of, documented by a system I was never told existed. I am not haunted. I am not followed. I am not damaged in any way I can measure. I am filed. And the next closure is in 19 days, and dispatch already knows who will be inside.